1878. The year was a brand seared onto the flank of the New Mexico territory, and the heat in Dry Willow was a physical weight. It pressed the dust down into the street, pressed the sweat from the brows of the men gathered in the square, and pressed the last measure of hope from the woman standing on the auction block. This was not an auction of property, not in the way of chattel and livestock. This was an auction of circumstance. The sign nailed to the makeshift podium, hammered together from raw, yellow pine, read Public Auction of Indentured Labor, by order of the Territorial Court. It was a civilized term for selling the desperate. She stood on the raw pine of the auction block, facing a half-circle of dusty boots, suspenders, and sweat-stained hats. Rowan Hale. She was 25 years old, though the hunger and the sun had carved the illusion of more time onto her face. The splintered wood was sharp beneath the thin, worn soles of her shoes. She had been found vagrant, a term that meant she had nowhere to sleep but the alley behind the mercantile, and indebted, a term that meant she owed Burke Malloy 3 weeks' lodging fees she could not pay. Sheriff Amos Reddick, a man whose silver star was tarnished by humidity and compromise, read the charge. His voice was hollow, trying to find authority where there was only procedure. Rowan Hale, found in violation of vagrancy statutes and carrying an outstanding debt to the Golden Spur. The court fines her the sum of the debt, plus fees. Failing payment, her labor is forfeit for a term of 6 months to the citizen who satisfies the fine. He paused, mopping his thick neck. We will open the bidding at $10 for the 6-month term. Rowan's vision was blurring, the faces in the crowd some leering, some openly pitying, most starkly indifferent, melted into a watercolor of browns and grays. It had been 2 days since she had eaten anything more than scraps, and the water she'd been given that morning tasted of alkali. The sun was a hammer striking the crown of her head. A voice from the crowd, $10. She don't look like much. Amos, can she cook? She's listed as literate, Reddick offered, as if that were a ranching skill. The buzzing in her ears became a roar, drowning the sheriff's voice. The shame was a cold sickness in her belly, colder even than the hunger. She had come west to escape a life dictated by others, only to find herself being sold by them. The square tilted. The hard line of the saloon roof swam against the bleached blue sky. She felt her knees unlock, a sudden, terrifying release of tension. She was falling. She pitched forward, a silent collapse toward the dust and the boots. The crowd shuffled, a collective gasp, but no one moved to break her fall, except one. A shadow broke the glare. He moved not like a man walking, but like a man displacing air, pushing through the wall of onlookers as if they were mist. He was on the platform in 2 strides, his boots heavy on the wood. Rowan fell not against the pine, but against something solid. She felt rough wool, warm leather, and the clean, sharp scent of sage and wind. A strong arm had wrapped around her waist, catching her, holding her upright before her head could strike the platform. She was pressed against a wall of muscle. He held her easily, his other hand gripping her shoulder to steady her. Coulter Ashford did not look at the crowd. He was 32 years old, the owner of the Ashford Mesa Ranch, and a man who spoke only when the words weighed more than the silence. He looked directly at Sheriff Reddick, who visibly flinched. His voice was not a shout. It was a low rumble, the sound of stones grinding together deep in the earth. Yet it carried across the entire square. She's not for sale. The silence that followed was absolute. The hammer of the sun, the buzzing flies, the shuffling boots all ceased. The statement hung in the air, challenging the very proceeding. In the deep shade of the Golden Spur's awning, Burke Malloy watched. Malloy was a man who thrived in the damp. Dark places of the territory, the back rooms of card tables, the bottom of whiskey glasses. He was pale, always dressed in dark broadcloth, and his stillness was that of a spider. He saw the intervention not as mercy, but as theft. He leaned toward the man standing beside him, a thin, whip-raw man named Silas Dorn. Malloy's whisper was audible only to Dorn, his lips barely moving. Ashford, what's his play? I have the paper on her. That debt is legal. Sheriff Reddick shifted, the leather of his gun belt groaning. He was a man trapped. He understood the written law on the paper he held, but he also understood the unwritten law of Burke Malloy's donations, which kept the town's meager coffers afloat. Mr. Ashford. Reddick began, trying to reclaim his authority. This is a legal proceeding. The woman is forfeit until the fine is met. Coulter Ashford held the sheriff's gaze. He did not release his hold on Rowan, who was leaning heavily against him, conscious but adrift. "What is the fine?" Coulter asked. "Well," Reddick stammered, unused to being challenged, "it's the debt, $20, for the lodging and the court fee." $20 was a month's wages for a top hand. It was a significant sum to simply throw away on a vagrant. Coulter did not argue. He did not bargain. He released his grip on Rowan's shoulder, only to reach inside his canvas ranch coat. He pulled a thick fold of bills from his vest pocket, bound by a leather strap. He stripped 2 notes from the roll. Without looking at them, he stepped forward and dropped the money onto the podium, the paper landing with a soft finality next to the gavel. Rowan's eyes fluttered open. The world swam back into focus, stabilized by the arm locked around her waist. She looked up, her head tilted back. She saw the line of a strong jaw shadowed by several days' growth of beard, and a throat tanned dark by the sun. She saw his eyes. They were not brown, not blue, but the color of the high desert sky just before a storm, a deep, bruised gray. The look that passed between them was not of gratitude or pity. It was something faster, harder. It was the shock of recognition, a lightning strike in a dust storm. 2 solitudes colliding in the most public way possible. Then he was moving. He stooped, sliding one arm under her knees and the other behind her back, and lifted her as if she weighed nothing. He turned his back on the sheriff, on Malloy, and on the stunned silence of the crowd. He walked off the platform, his boots sounding the rhythm of departure. The crowd parted for him, men stepping back as he carried her toward the sturdy buckboard wagon parked near the water trough. The ride away from the square was a blur of shimmering heat and the rhythmic clop of horses. Coulter placed her on the wagon seat, his movements economical and devoid of fuss. He climbed up beside her, took the reins, and with a soft click of his tongue, set the team in motion. The desert air, heavy and baked, whipped at her face. It felt like the blast from an open furnace. Rowan gripped the side of the wooden seat, her knuckles white. She was dizzy, sick, and mortally confused. She had been rescued, but she was not free. She realized, simply indebted to a different man, a stranger. This one paid in cash instead of waiting for bids. She glanced sideways at him. He was focused on the road, his profile stark against the glaring sky. His hat was pulled low, shadowing the eyes that had unsettled her. "I will repay you," she said. Her voice was a dry croak, but the words were firm. "I am not a charity case. I will work for what you paid." Coulter Ashford kept his eyes on the road for a long moment. He did not look at her when he finally spoke. "We'll sort the ledgers at the ranch." Back in the square, the crowd began to disperse, cheated of their afternoon's entertainment. Sheriff Reddick quickly and quietly gathered the $20. Burke Malloy had not moved. He watched the buckboard kick up a plume of dust as it left town. "Silas," Malloy said, his voice flat. Silas Dorn stepped out from the awning, pulling a small, worn notebook from his pocket. "Ashford Mesa Ranch," Malloy said. "He's interfering. I don't like interference. I want to know why he cares about that piece of debt. I want to know where he puts her. I want to know if he sleeps." Silas Dorn nodded, his eyes already scanning the street. He noted the wagon's broad track, the specific gait of the 2 horses. He was a tracker, and the ranch was 20 miles out. He would be there by nightfall. As the buckboard cleared the last shacks of dry willow, a sound rose above the rattle of the wagon wheels. From the small adobe chapel on the hill, a bell began to toll the hour. It was a high, clear sound, an echo of order and legitimacy. It cut through the oppressive heat, a clean blade of noise against the profound silence of Malloy's shadow, which already stretched long and dark across the town's main street. The Ashford Mesa Ranch was not a gentle place. It sat 20 miles from Dry Willow, carved into a high plain where the wind never seemed to stop. The buckboard wagon rattled over the last rise, and Rowan saw the house. It was not a flimsy wooden structure like the buildings in town. It was a 2-story house built of thick, pale stone, square and solid, as if it had grown from the bedrock itself. It faced east, looking out over a vast, wind-scoured valley that dropped away into purple shadows. It was a fortress against the elements, and for the first time in months, Rowan felt a breath she had been holding release. Coulter pulled the team to a halt by the horse trough, the water sparkling, cool and clean. He said nothing, just looped the reins and climbed down. He came around to her side, offering a hand. His grip was firm, impersonal, and he helped her to the ground. Her legs were unsteady, but the dizziness had passed, replaced by a profound weariness. The front door of the stone house opened, and a woman stepped out onto the porch. She was in her 50-somethings, tall and straight-backed, with iron-gray hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to pull her eyes taut. She wiped her hands on a thick linen apron. "Mr. Coulter," she said, her voice as dry as the wind. She looked at Rowan, her gaze sweeping over her from head to toe, taking in the torn hem, the dust-caked face, the exhaustion. It was not an unkind look, but it was assessing. "You're late for supper." "We had business in town. Eudora," Coulter said, his voice flat. He gestured to Rowan. "This is Miss Rowan Hale. She'll be staying." Eudora Pike, the ranch housekeeper, simply nodded. "Well, she looks half-starved. Get her inside. There's stew, and the cornbread just came out." The kitchen was the heart of the house. It was enormous, dominated by a black iron stove that radiated a glorious, steady heat. The air was thick with the scent of roasted meat, sharp onions, and the rich, sweet smell of fresh-baked cornbread. It was the smell of life, of stability. And it made Rowan's empty stomach ache with a fierce, sudden pang. Eudora pointed to a small chair by the hearth. "Sit, water first." She handed Rowan a tin cup of cool water from a bucket, and Rowan drank it slowly, purposefully, forcing herself not to gulp it down like an animal. Eudora then ladled a thick, dark stew into a bowl, added a heavy slice of golden cornbread, and set it on the small table. Rowan ate. She ate with a focus that blocked out everything else, the quiet presence of Coulter, who had taken a cup of coffee and was watching the valley through the window, and the efficient movements of Eudora. The food was simple, hot, and the best thing she had ever tasted. When the bowl was clean, Coulter finally turned from the window. "Eudora," he said, "Miss Hale will take the east room, the one by the stairs." "It'll need airing," Eudora replied without turning. "But it's clean." Coulter nodded, then looked at Rowan. The gray storm of his eyes was unreadable. "I have a proposition. Miss Hale, you said you would work. I need a secretary." Rowan blinked, surprised. "A secretary? My last one was my father. He died 3 years ago. His ledgers are a mess. The ranch orders are a mess. The correspondence is piling up." He jested. "I'm good with cattle. I am not good with ink." He motioned her to follow, walking out of the kitchen and into a small adjoining room. It was a ranch office. A heavy oak desk sat against one wall, piled high with receipts, leather-bound ledgers, and stacks of letters. A layer of dust covered everything but the desk chair. "The position is temporary," Coulter continued, his voice echoing slightly in the quiet room. "You'll manage the ledgers, tally the beef counts, handle the supply invoices, and write letters to the suppliers in Santa Fe. You'll have room and board, plus a salary, $30 a month." Rowan stared at the desk. Order from chaos. That, she understood. She had been a bookkeeper in her father's small hardware business back east before he died, and the bank took everything. This was work she could do. But she stood up straighter, gathering the last of her strength. Her voice, fortified by the food, was clear and steady. "Mr. Ashford, I thank you for the offer, but I cannot accept a salary." He raised an eyebrow. "A fractional movement. You paid $20 to the sheriff. a fine that I owed. I will accept the room and the board, and I will work as your secretary. Until that $20 is repaid in full, at the wage you offered. That will be 20 days. Coulter studied her. She did not look away. She was not begging. She was negotiating. He saw the spine of her pride, bent by circumstance but unbroken. A long moment passed. Finally, he gave a single, short nod. 20 days, then, he said. After that, we can discuss a salary. He turned to leave, then paused in the doorway. Eudora is in charge of the house. I am in charge of the ranch. There are no debts between decent folk. Miss Hale, only agreements. He left her there. Rowan sagged against the doorframe, the relief so profound it was almost painful. She was not a prisoner. She was not a vagrant. She was an employee. The next morning, the education began. Life on the Ashford Mesa Ranch was dictated by the sun and the cattle. Rowan was woken by Eudora Pike before the first hint of light. 4:30, Miss Hale. Eudora's voice came through the door, sharp as a tap on glass. The hands eat at 5. By the time Rowan was dressed and downstairs, the kitchen was already a hive of activity. Eudora had 2 young women from a nearby homestead helping, and the long dining hall next to the kitchen was filling with men. 18 ranch hands, rangy and weathered, filed in, smelling of horses, leather, and the cold morning air. They ate with a silent, focused intensity. After the whirlwind of breakfast, a man stepped onto the porch as Rowan was shaking out a tablecloth. He was the opposite of Coulter Ashford. Where Coulter was shadow and rock, this man was sun-bleached wood. He was older, perhaps 40, with a calm, open face and kind eyes. He held his hat in his hands. "Ma'am, you must be Miss Hale. I'm Eli Cordell. I'm Mr. Ashford's foreman." "Mr. Cordell," Rowan said, nodding. "Mr. Coulter said you'd be handling the books." Eli said, his voice slow and steady, "I reckon you'll need to know what we're logging. Can I show you the heart of the place?" He led her not to the barns or the corrals, but to a rise behind the house. From there, she could see the valley in the clear morning light, a ribbon of dark green cottonwoods and willows cut through the dry grass. "That," Eli said, pointing, "is the Red Hollow Spring. It's the only reliable water on this mesa. It surfaces on Mr. Ashford's land, runs for 2 miles, and feeds every trough and irrigation ditch we have. Without Red Hollow, there is no Ashford Mesa Ranch. There are no cattle. There is just dust." He explained the rotation, how they moved the herds from one grazing pasture to another, giving the land time to recover. He explained the irrigation schedule for the small hayfields they depended on for winter feed. "The water," he said, his gaze distant, "is the blood of this place. Everything else is just bone and muscle. You protect the blood." Rowan returned to the dusty office with a new understanding. She was not just counting barrels of flour or boxes of cartridges. She was tracking the resources that kept this entire, massive operation alive. She set to work. The first 3 days were a battle against her father-in-law's chaos. His system was non-existent. Receipts were shoved into drawers, invoices were paid twice, and letters from angry suppliers were left unanswered. Rowan was meticulous. She swept the dust from the room. She cleaned the inkwells, sharpened the quills, and created a new ledger. She built a system. Incoming, outstanding, paid. She went through the stacks of paper, one by one, her neat, precise handwriting bringing order to the columns. She learned the rhythms of the house, the 4:30 a.m. wake-up, the massive, boisterous breakfast, the long, quiet morning of work, the midday meal, eaten with Eudora and Eli, the afternoon, spent verifying the inventories in the smokehouse and the root cellar, the supper, where Coulter would appear, eat in near silence, and retreat to the porch to smoke and watch the sun go down. He rarely spoke to her. He was a presence, a shadow in the corner of her eye, but he was watching. On the 5th evening, he entered the office. She was bent over the main ledger, a smudge of ink on her cheek. The lamp cast a warm, golden circle on the desk. "You've changed the system," he stated. It was not a question. Rowan did not startle. She had heard his boots. She pointed with the end of her pen. Your father was logging inventory by date of purchase. I've changed it to log by item. All the flour, all the ammunition, all the leather. This way. You can see what you have at a glance. Not when you bought it. She turned to a new page. I've also cross-referenced the feed orders with Mr. Cordell's grazing manifests. You were ordering too much winter feed for the north pasture, because the manifests showed the herd was moving south. He stood over her shoulder, looking down at the neat columns. She could feel the heat radiating from him, smell the faint scent of horse and clean sweat. He was silent for so long she thought he was angry. When he spoke, his voice was quiet. My father was a rancher, not a clerk. He hated this room. He looked at the new ledger. Rowan watched his face. His expression was usually closed, shuttered, but for a brief second, she saw the hard line of his mouth soften. It was not a smile. It was the easing of a long-held tension. This is better, he said. He nodded once, then left the room. Rowan let out a slow breath. It was the first time he had acknowledged her work. A week later, she was cleaning the desk itself. It was old, the oak scarred and dark. One of the deep bottom drawers was stuck fast. She worked at it, jiggling it, until something inside shifted and the drawer slid open with a groan. It was a junk drawer, old quills, a dried-up inkwell, a single spur, but beneath them, rolled up and bound with a brittle leather tie, were several tubes of paper. Curious. She untied them. They were maps, surveys of the Ashford Mesa land, dating back 10, 15 years, and with them, a much newer document, an unsigned contract for water rights, drafted by a law firm in Santa Fe. She unrolled the largest map. It was a detailed survey of the entire property. Rowan had always had a knack for this. Her father had taught her technical drawing, how to read the lines of a blueprint, the angles of a survey. She stared at the map, tracing the line of the Red Hollow Spring. She compared it to the other, older maps. Something was wrong. A small detail. On the oldest map, the spring source was marked by a formation labeled Bishop's Rock. On the new map, Bishop's Rock seemed to be drawn in a slightly different location, a few hundred yards to the east. It was a tiny discrepancy, but it was enough to shift the boundary line. Enough, she realized, to make the source of the spring appear to be just outside the Ashford property line. Eudora Pike entered, carrying a cup of hot coffee. She glanced at the maps covering the desk. Her face, usually impassive, tightened. Old troubles, she said, setting the cup down. Eudora, do you know these maps? This new one seems to have an error. The marker for Bishop's Rock is moved. Eudora looked at the map, then at Rowan. Her voice was low. It's no error, child. It's a lie. A lie who would... The man who wanted to buy this ranch after Mr. Ashford's father died. The man who tried to call in debts the old man didn't even owe. The man who bought your debt for that room at the Spur. Rowan looked up, confused. Burke Malloy. Eudora nodded, her lips a thin, hard line. Malloy has been trying to get his hands on this land for 2 years. He doesn't want the cattle. He doesn't want the house. He wants the water. She tapped the map. He's bought half the town. Child, the sheriff, the land office clerk. He's been trying to prove that Red Hollow Spring isn't on Ashford land, that it's public domain. If he does that, he can file a claim, buy it, and damn it. She looked Rowan dead in the eye, her warning cold and absolute. You weren't just a vagrant he was making an example of. You were a woman Coulter Ashford looked at twice. Malloy was buying you to get at him. He wants the water. Rowan, not you. And he will destroy this ranch, and anyone on it, to get it. The first crack in the town's facade appeared at Wainwright's Mercantile. Rowan had been at the ranch for nearly 3 weeks, her initial 20-day agreement looming. She had transformed the office, and the work had settled her nerves. Now, she rode into Dry Willow with Eli Cordell to finalize the month's supply order. The Mercantile was a haven of civilization. It smelled of calico fabric, coffee beans, and milled lumber. a sharp, clean contrast to the sour odor of beer and despair that clung to the golden spur across the street. Mrs. Wainwright, a widow with a face as finely lined as a dry riverbed, ran the establishment. She watched Rowan tally the list: flour, salt, cartridges, axle grease. "You're the one from the Ashford place," Mrs. Wainwright said, not unkindly. "The one Mr. Ashford collected." "I'm his bookkeeper," Rowan said evenly, not looking up from the ledger. Mrs. Wainwright busied herself, weighing out coffee beans. As Rowan slid the ledger forward to compare it with the store's account, the older woman leaned in, her voice dropping to a papery whisper. "You're sharp with those numbers. I can see. Be sharper. We've had a rash of irregular invoices this past month. From the freight office. Things paid for that never arrived. Things delivered that were never ordered." Rowan frowned. "On Mr. Ashford's account. And others," Mrs. Wainwright said, straightening up as another customer entered. "Just be sharp. Malloy owns the freight office, too. He likes his books muddy." Rowan understood the warning. Muddy books were how false debts were born. It was how a man like Malloy could claim a man owed him for 3 weeks' lodging when he had no money to pay. When she and Eli stepped back onto the boardwalk, the town felt different. The air was charged. She felt the stares. This was Malloy's counterattack. It was not aimed at Coulter Ashford. It was aimed at his new bookkeeper. The men idling outside the Golden Spur, Silas Dorn among them, watched her openly. Their whispers were loud enough to carry, "That's the one, fled her bill. Wonder what she's bookkeeping for Ashford." A low chuckle followed. Rowan's face burned. The shame of the auction block, which had receded into a dull ache, flared anew. She kept her chin high and walked toward the wagon. The women of the town were different. Near the dressmakers, 2 women in bonnets turned away, their expressions pinched with judgment. But another, a young woman carrying a basket of laundry, met Rowan's eye and gave a small, tight-lipped nod of sympathy. The town was being split, and she was the dividing line. "Pay them no mind, miss," Eli said quietly, helping her onto the wagon seat. "Their tongues wag, but they don't know the truth of things." "They know the truth, mister. Malloy gives them," Rowan said, her voice tight. The rumors were only the first volley. The real attack came 3 nights later. Rowan was woken not by a sound, but by a silence. The normal, soft night sounds of the ranch, the sigh of the wind, the nickering of horses in the corral were gone, replaced by a low, distressed moaning. It was an unnatural sound, thick and full of pain. She lit her lamp. Through her window, she could see shadows moving in the pre-dawn light. Men were running toward the south pasture, carrying lanterns. She dressed quickly and went downstairs. Coulter was already gone. Eudora was in the kitchen, stoking the stove with a furious energy, her face grim. "What is it? What's that sound?" Rowan asked. "The cattle," Eudora said, slamming the iron stove lid. "They're dry." Eli Cordell burst into the kitchen, his face slick with sweat despite the morning chill. "It's the main flume, ma'am, from Red Hollow. It's been cut." Rowan followed him outside. The sun was just breaking, casting a sick, gray light over the ranch. The terrible, lowing cry of thirst was coming from hundreds of throats. In the main holding pasture, the cattle were milling, restless, their heads low. Coulter was already there, riding back from the spring line. He dismounted, his face a mask of cold fury. He was carrying something in his hand. He met Eli by the cistern, which was now nothing but wet mud at the bottom. "It wasn't an axe," Coulter said, his voice clipped. "It was an auger. They bored a dozen holes in the bottom of the wooden pipe, 1/2 a mile up, drained it dry into the arroyo." He opened his hand. In his palm lay 3 thick, black spikes. They were not standard ranch nails. They were heavy, squared off, machine-made, rail spikes. Eli breathed, touching one. "Or bridge spikes. Ain't nothing we use." "No," Coulter said. "But they use them on the railroad. And Malloy's man Dorn used to be a foreman for the Southern Pacific Line." This was Malloy's signature, a deliberate, Industrial sabotage. It was a message I can turn off your water. The ranch hands spent the entire day in a frantic race against the sun, hauling barrels of water from the secondary wells to keep the main herd alive while Eli and his team worked to plug the holes. Coulter Ashford cleaned his gun, put on his town coat, and rode to Dry Willow. He found Sheriff Amos Reddick sitting behind his desk, feet up, polishing a silver dollar. The office smelled of stale tobacco and old paper. Coulter dropped the heavy spike on Reddick's desk. It landed with a loud crack, making the sheriff jump. "That," Coulter said, "was pulled from my water flume this morning. My herd was dry." Reddick looked at the spike. He looked at Coulter's face. He slowly took his feet off the desk. He did not touch the spike. "That's a bad business. Coulter, a real bad business. You lose any stock." "No thanks to the man who did it. We both know who that is. Silas Dorn. He works for Malloy." Reddick sighed. He leaned back in his chair, the wood creaking in protest. He picked up his polishing cloth. "Now, Coulter, you can't come in here accusing a man like Mr. Malloy without proof. Dorn is a citizen of this town. You see Dorn holding the auger? I'm telling you he did it. And I'm telling you, that's just your word," Reddick said, his tone placating, oily. "You bring me a witness. You bring me solid proof that ties that spike to Silas Dorn. And I'll do my job. But I can't arrest a man over a piece of iron and a suspicion. I need a solid case. My hands are tied." Coulter stared at the sheriff, his contempt a palpable thing in the small, hot room. He said nothing. He turned, his boots heavy on the floorboards, and left the office. The spike remained on the desk, a black accusation. When he returned to the ranch that evening, the fury had settled into a cold, dangerous resolve. He ate supper in silence, but his eyes kept moving to the office, where Rowan was working late, the ledger open under the lamplight. Rowan knew he had failed with Reddick. The law was a locked door. She stared at the map she had found, now pinned to the wall above the desk. The old survey, the unsigned water contract, the new suspect map. Eudora's warning echoed in her head. He wants the water. The sabotage was crude, a brute force attack. But the maps were something else. This was the real threat, the legal one. Coulter entered the office, bringing the cold night air with him. He stood by the window, watching the darkness, his back to her. "Reddick won't move," he said. "He won't move because Malloy already paid him not to," Rowan said quietly, her eyes on the papers. "The sabotage was just to hurt you, to make you thirsty. The real attack is here." She picked up the lamp, holding it close to the wall. "Mr. Ashford, I need you to look. This is your father's original survey from 1865. See this marker?" She pointed. "Bishop's Rock. It marks the northeast corner of your land, and the Red Hollow Spring is clearly inside the line." She then pointed to the newer map, the one from the stuck drawer. "This is a new survey. It's not signed. Look at Bishop's Rock." Coulter leaned in, his shadow covering the desk. He squinted. "It's moved." "It's moved," Rowan confirmed, her voice gaining intensity. "It's shifted 2 degrees east, a tiny change. But look what it does." She traced the new boundary line with her finger. The red-inked line of the Red Hollow Spring source was now, by a margin of perhaps 50 yards, outside the Ashford property line. "This map," Rowan said, her voice dropping, "makes your spring public domain. If Malloy files this survey at the Territorial Land Office, and our Sheriff Reddick confirms it, he can file a claim. He can buy the source of your water." Coulter was still... The implication settled on him, heavy as stone. This was not a fist fight. This was an execution by ink. "It's a lie," he said, his voice low. "It's a very precise lie, but it's just a map. It's not proof of fraud. To make this legal, he would have to make the land match the map." Coulter looked at her, understanding dawning. New markers. New markers. She nodded. He'd have to destroy the old stone cairns and set new ones, certified by a surveyor. He can't do that in broad daylight. Eli's men are all over the range. He'd do it at night. Coulter finished. Rowan took a deep breath. This was it. This was the moment. We need to ride to Red Hollow. Tonight. Not the flume, but the springhead itself. Up by Bishop's Rock. We need to see if they're there. We need to catch them doing it. An hour later, they were riding. Coulter, Rowan, and Eli. They moved without lanterns. The horses' hooves muffled in the sandy soil, guided by a sharp sliver of moon. They dismounted a quarter-mile from the spring, tying the horses in a grove of cottonwoods. They moved the rest of the way on foot, Coulter in the lead, his rifle in his hand. As they cleared the last rise, Coulter held up a hand. Voices, and a light. Below them, in the small canyon where the Red Hollow spring bubbled up from the earth, a shielded lantern cast a weak, yellow glow. 2 men were working. A third stood guard. Rowan could see a surveyor's transit on a tripod, and beside it, several cloth sacks. It was Silas Dorn. He was pouring a white powder from a sack into a small hole, mixing it with water from the spring. "Lime," Rowan whispered, her stomach tightening. "He's pouring new markers. They set fast and look like old bleached stone." "The guard is new," Eli breathed. "The other is Dorn. We need the survey." Coulter said, "We need his logbook." He didn't give an order. He just moved. He circled wide, to the north, using the boulders as cover. Eli faded south to cut off the path to their horses. Rowan held her breath. Coulter stepped out from behind a massive rock, not 10 feet from them. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the night like a razor. "That's Ashford land you're marking. Dorn." The guard spun, firing a wild shot. The bullet screamed off the rock near Coulter's head. Silas Dorn cursed, kicking the lantern over, plunging the canyon into near total darkness. He scrambled not for his gun, but for his buckboard wagon, hidden in the shadows. "Get him!" Coulter roared, firing at the spot where the guard had been. Dorn lashed the wagon team, and the light buckboard lurched into motion, crashing over the rocks, heading for the narrow gap that led back to the main trail. Coulter and Rowan ran, sprinting for their horses. They mounted in a single, fluid motion, Rowan's heart hammering against her ribs. Coulter spurred his horse, leaning low, flying over the rough terrain to intercept. The wagon was fast, but Coulter's horse was faster. He cut a hard angle, closing the distance, trying to get in front, to turn the team. Rowan was right behind him. She saw Dorn raise a pistol. He wasn't aiming at Coulter. He was aiming at Coulter's horse. Rowan acted without thinking. She had her lariat, a tool she'd been practicing with in the yard. She pulled it free. She wasn't a roper, not like Eli, but she didn't need to be. She needed to stop the wagon. She spurred her horse, drawing parallel to the buckboard's rear. She swung the rope once, twice, aiming low. She let it fly. The loop was wide and clumsy, but it was true. It sailed under the buckboard, catching on the rear axle. Snagging a wheel spoke, Rowan yanked her horse to a stop, snubbing the rope hard around her saddle horn. The rope went taut. The buckboard's rear wheel stopped dead. The front of the wagon kept going, with a sharp crack of splintering wood. The wagon slewed sideways, tipped, and rolled onto its side, spilling Dorn and his tools onto the rocky ground. Coulter was off his horse instantly, rifle raised, but Dorn was already up. He was a shadow, scrambling into the dark maze of boulders, faster on foot than any horse could follow. Eli appeared, his own rifle ready. "He's gone, boss, headed east into the breaks." Coulter lowered his rifle, his breath hissing between his teeth. He turned to Rowan, who was shaking, her hands locked on the rope. He walked over, his face unreadable in the moonlight, and gently took the rope from her. The wagon was a wreck. Sacks of lime were split open. The transit was smashed. "He got away," Rowan said, her voice trembling. "Did he?" Coulter said. He bent down, where Silas Dorn had fallen. Half hidden under a spilled sack was a small, leather-bound notebook. Rowan slid from her horse. She picked it up. It was damp. She flipped it open, It was not a diary. It was filled with columns of figures, cosines, angles, and coordinates. It was a surveyor's field log. "We have it," Rowan whispered, her voice full of awe. "We have the proof." They rode back to the ranch under a cold, accusing moon. The captured notebook was heavy in Coulter's pocket, a weight of lead and paper. Rowan's hands, which had been locked on the saddle horn, were shaking, the adrenaline of the chase draining away, leaving a bone-deep chill. Coulter reined in at the main house. Eli took the horses, his face grim. "I'll post a watch. Dorn won't be back tonight, but his anger will." Coulter nodded and turned to Rowan. She was dismounting, her movements stiff. As she stepped down, the moonlight caught a dark, raw scrape across the back of her hand, a rope burn, where the lariat had pulled taut against her skin. He said nothing, but took her elbow and guided her onto the porch. He didn't take her to the kitchen, where Eudora would be waiting. He took her to the iron pump by the steps. He pumped a stream of cold, clear water into the basin, the sound a sharp splash in the night silence. "Give me your hand," he commanded. It was not a request. She obeyed. Rowan watched as he soaked a clean rag from the box Eudora kept for washing. His hands, which she had only seen grip reins or lift heavy sacks, were impossibly gentle. He held her wrist, turning her hand over. He began to clean the raw scrape, his touch methodical, slow, working from the edges in. It was an impersonal, practical act, but it was the first time he had touched her with deliberate care. His fingers were rough, calloused, yet his movements were steady. The shock of the cold water was followed by the warmth of his grip. She was not looking at her hand. She was looking at the top of his head, the way his dark hair curled slightly over the collar of his coat. He was focused intently on his task, his brows drawn in concentration. The silence stretched, filled only by the chirr of night insects. When he finished cleaning the wound, he looked up. His eyes met hers, in the pale moonlight. His gaze was stripped of its usual hardness. He was looking at her, truly looking. And she saw the exhaustion, the weight of the fight, and something else, a quiet intensity that made her breath catch. Neither of them spoke. The moment was held, suspended, fragile as a spider's web. He took a clean, dry strip of linen from the box and began to wrap her hand, his movement still slow. "You were fast tonight," he said, his voice a low rumble. "That was a smart move. With the rope. I was lucky," she whispered, her voice unsteady. He finished wrapping the bandage, his thumb pressing gently on the knot to secure it. "I don't believe in luck. Rowan." He let go of her hand. The loss of his touch was immediate, a sudden return of the night's chill. He straightened up, and the moment was broken. Eudora was waiting inside, a lamp lit in the kitchen. She looked at the bandage on Rowan's hand, and then at Coulter's shuttered face as he walked past her toward the office. She handed Rowan a cup of hot, sweet tea, her expression knowing. "Mr. Coulter is a good man," Eudora said quietly, turning to the stove. "He's built like this house, stone on the outside, solid all the way through, but he's been shut tight since his father passed, closed up against the wind." Rowan sipped the tea, the warmth spreading through her chest. Eudora looked at her over her shoulder. "A heart needs a safe place to settle, child, just like a horse needs a solid barn door in a storm, a place that won't splinter when the wind blows." The words settled in Rowan's heart. It was both a warning and, strangely, a blessing. In the office, the small, damp notebook sat on the desk under the lamp. Coulter had it open. Rowan, her bandaged hand feeling strange and protected, stood beside him. The pages were filled with cryptic, technical details, angles, degrees, coordinates, and initials. "V and S," Rowan murmured, tracing the letters. "And these dates." Coulter paced the small room, his boots heavy on the floorboards. "It's a survey log. It's Dorn's field book. This is the proof. This is what Reddick said he needed." He grabbed his hat. "I'm riding back to town." "No." He stopped, his hand on the doorknob. "Don't," Rowan said, stepping in front of him. She had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. "Coulter. Wait, please, think." It was the first time she had used his given name. It stopped him cold. "This," she said, tapping the notebook, "proves that Silas Dorn is a cheat. It does not prove that Burke Malloy hired him. Reddick is Malloy's man. He will take this book, and it will be lost in a fire by morning. Dorn will disappear over the border, and Malloy will hire a new man. We will have gained nothing. We'll have wasted our only proof." His frustration was a visible thing, a tension in his shoulders. "So what do we do? Let him get away with it?" "No," Rowan said, her mind racing. She looked past him, at the wall where the ranch manifests hung. "We set a bigger trap. We don't just catch the hired man. We catch the man who hired him." She walked back to the desk, her eyes scanning the pages. V&S, Verity and Sons. I've seen that name before. On a freight invoice for imported wire. They're a big surveying company based in Santa Fe. She pulled the old railroad timetable from the wall hook. "And these numbers, 8:15, 10:40, they aren't measurements. Look at the dates beside them. They match the train schedule. These are arrival times at Whitlow Junction, not Dry Willow." Coulter was still, watching her, the pieces clicking into place. "The railroad." "Exactly," Rowan said, her voice electric with discovery. "Malloy isn't just trying to steal your water. Coulter, he's trying to sell it. The Southern Pacific is building west. They need water depots every 50 miles. If Malloy can prove the Red Hollow Spring is public land, he can file the claim and sell the water rights to the railroad for a fortune." The scale of the conspiracy settled over them, vast and greedy. "He's bringing in Verity and Sons to make the fake markers look official," Rowan continued. "He's scheduling a meeting with a railroad inspector, probably on a special, unlisted train. He's going to finalize the entire fraudulent sale, all at once." Coulter looked at her, his anger replaced by a cold, calculating respect. "And that's where we catch him. We catch the surveyor, the railroad man, and Malloy, all in one room, with the fake deeds on the table. One clean shot," Rowan affirmed. The next day, the ranch was quiet. Too quiet. A heavy, anxious tension hung in the air. Coulter and Eli doubled the patrols, but the land was vast. Rowan felt the need to move. She went to the corral, saddled the mare Coulter had assigned her, and began to ride. Practicing the turns, the stops. But she was edgy, her movements jerky. She was fighting the horse, pulling too hard on the reins, just as she was fighting the fear inside her. Coulter emerged from the barn, his shadow falling long in the afternoon sun. He leaned on the top rail of the fence, watching her. "You're fighting her," he called out, his voice cutting through her frustration. "I need to be faster." Rowan snapped back, pulling the mare into a rough, spinning halt. He pushed off the fence and entered the corral. Moving with that same unhurried, ground-covering stride, he walked to the mare's head, stroking her neck, calming the animal with his presence. "You don't need to be faster," he said, his voice calm. "You need to be better. Stop pulling. Feel her mouth. Stand up." "What?" "In the stirrups. Put your full weight in them. Stand up." Rowan pushed herself up, wobbling precariously. "No," he said. He stepped to her side. "Settle your weight, into your heels. Feel the horse move under you. You're bracing against her instead of moving with her." He placed his left hand on her shoulder, steadying her, and then he placed his right hand on the small of her back, flat against her waist. Rowan froze. His touch was not improper. It was the practical, firm hold of an instructor, but it was his hand. It was warm, solid, and it sent a silent jolt all the way to her toes. She was acutely aware of his closeness, of the solid muscle of his chest near her shoulder, of the faint scent of sun-warmed leather and sage. "There," he said, his voice low, almost in her ear. "Stop holding your breath. Breathe. Now. Shift your hips. Move with her, not against her." She was hardly aware of the horse. All she could feel was the steady pressure of his hand on her back, anchoring her. Her breath was hitched, tight in her chest. She could feel the slow, steady rhythm of his breathing. Unconsciously, she matched it. Her own breath deepened, syncing with his as her body relaxed. The mare beneath her calmed instantly. "That's it," he murmured. He didn't move his hand. "That's it." He stepped back. The loss of his touch was sharp, a sudden cold void. "Practice that," he said, his voice back to its normal, flat tone. He turned and left the corral. Rowan stood in the stirrups, her heart hammering a rhythm that had nothing to do with riding. The counterattack came just before midnight. A shout shattered the peace. "Fire stable, the stable is on fire!" Rowan was out of bed, pulling on her boots, her heart seized with ice. Coulter was already gone, his door swinging open. She ran outside into a nightmare. The horse stable, not the main barn, but the one housing the riding mounts, was burning. Orange flames licked up the dry wood, roaring into the night sky. The terrible, high-pitched screaming of horses split the air. Eli and the hands were already there, a frantic bucket brigade forming from the main trough. Coulter and 2 others, cloths tied over their faces, ran into the burning building. Rowan joined the line, grabbing a bucket. Eudora right beside her. The heat was scorching, the smoke a thick, acrid poison. She passed bucket after bucket, her arms aching, her lungs on fire, her eyes streaming. Coulter emerged, leading 2 coughing, terrified horses. He shoved their reins at a hand and turned to go back in. "That's the last of them," Eli yelled. "Now, save the building." They fought the fire for an hour, a desperate, losing battle against the dry wood and the night wind. They managed to keep it from spreading to the main barn, but the stable and all the tack within were a smoking ruin. As the flames died down to sullen, glowing embers, Eli emerged from the shadows, dragging a man by the collar. He threw the man at Coulter's feet. The man was singed, coughing, and not from the area. "Found this one," Eli growled. "Hiding behind the feed sacks. He smells of kerosene. It's not Dorn." Coulter, his face black with soot, his shirt soaked, hauled the man to his feet. "Who paid you?" Coulter's voice was deadly quiet. The man spat, "Go to hell, rancher." Coulter didn't hit him. He slammed him back against the trough, the wood groaning. "That stable held my father's saddle. The horses you terrified. They were his bloodline. You will have one chance to tell me who sent you." The threat was not of violence, but of consequence. The man saw the cold, gray promise in Coulter's eyes, and he broke. "It was Dorn," he cried. "Silas Dorn. He paid us 4 of us. He just said to set the fire, create a diversion to keep you busy." "A diversion from what?" Rowan stepped forward, her bandaged hand clutched at her throat. "I don't know," the man wailed. "He just said his boss, Malloy, had big business tomorrow night. A special train at the junction. He wanted Ashford busy, wanted his eyes off the ball. That's all I know. I swear, a special train, tomorrow night." They locked the man in the root cellar. The ranch was silent again, but for the hiss of the dying fire and the low, nervous nickering of the saved horses, the adrenaline was gone, leaving a cold, grim exhaustion. Eudora and Eli went to check on the men. Coulter and Rowan were left alone by the smoking ruin. "Tomorrow night," Coulter said, staring at the destruction. "It all fits. The notebook, the fire, the train. He's making his move," Rowan said, her voice hollow. "While he thinks you're blinded by this, he's at Whitlow Junction, closing his deal." She shivered, and it wasn't from the cold. Coulter turned to her. In the flickering, dying light of the fire, his face was a mask of soot and resolve. "When this is over," he said, his voice quiet, but carrying a new weight. "When the smoke is cleared and the liars are buried, there are things I've left unsaid." Rowan looked up at him. The chaos of the fire receded, and there was only the space between them. He searched her face, his gaze intense. "I need to say them." Rowan's heart, which had been pounding with fear, gave a single, heavy beat. Eudora's words came back to her, a solid barn door in a storm. "I'll be here," she whispered, her voice thick with smoke and emotion. "I'll listen." Whitlow Junction was not a town. It was a scar on the flat, wind-blown plains, a water tower, a small, windowless depot, and a siding of track that vanished into the darkness. It existed only to service the thirst of the steam engines. A special train sat on the siding, hissing steam into the cold night air. It was composed of a single, heavy engine, a dark-windowed passenger car, and one sealed freight car. From the freight car, men were working under the yellow glare of lanterns. These were not ranch hands. They were professionals, dressed in canvas and denim, and they moved with purpose, unloading heavy, brass-bound chests, tripods, and long wooden boxes. The seal of Verity Sun Surveying was stenciled on the equipment. In the deep shadow of the water tower, Coulter Ashford and Eli Cordell watched, rifles held ready. They were two statues of vengeance, their faces grim. "That's a lot of equipment just to sign a paper," Eli murmured, his voice a low vibration. "They're not just signing," Coulter said, his eyes fixed on the activity. "They're moving in. They're here to set the new markers tonight." A figure separated from the shadows near the depot and began walking toward the activity by the freight car. The figure was small, dressed in baggy canvas trousers, a man's oversized shirt, and a flat cap pulled low, hiding its face. The figure was carrying a small wooden crate. It was Rowan. Her plan had been desperate and simple. She had argued that Coulter and Eli were known. They were a threat, but a servant, a boy carrying supplies, would be invisible. Her heart hammered against her ribs. A frantic bird in a small cage. In the crate, two dark glass bottles sat nestled in straw. One was a fresh, unopened bottle of Higgins's best black ink, stolen from her own desk. The other was her own creation. She had spent an hour in the lamp oil shed, carefully mixing the same black ink with a fine, clear, odorless oil, a concoction designed to look dark and wet, but one that would never, ever set. An ink that would bleed under the slightest heat. She placed the crate near the surveyor's trunks, as if it were part of their supplies, then melted back into the shadows near the platform, becoming just another patch of darkness. The door of the passenger car opened, spilling a rectangle of bright, civilized light onto the dusty platform. 3 men descended. The first was Burke Malloy. He was immaculate in a dark city suit, his pale face calm, his movements precise. He looked as if he owned the night. The second was his lawyer, Clem Harrow, a thin, nervous man who clutched a heavy leather satchel as if it held his own soul. The third man was new. He was stout, dressed in an expensive Eastern suit, and looked annoyed by the dust and the wind. This was the railroad inspector, the man with the power to sign away the Red Hollow Spring, the head surveyor from Verity Sons. A man with a graying beard met them, holding a lantern high. "Mr. Malloy, Mr. Harrow, Inspector," the surveyor said, nodding. "We're prepared to set the new boundary markers as soon as the deed is countersigned." "Excellent, Mr. Verity," Harrow said, his voice slick. He gestured to a large, flat-topped freight crate, turning it into a makeshift desk. "Inspector, if you'll step this way, we can finalize the water mortgage." The inspector grunted, pulling a watch. "Let's be quick about it. This is highly irregular. Malloy." "Only in its efficiency, sir," Malloy said, his voice a smooth balm. "A new, verified survey, a clear title, and a guaranteed water source for your expansion. All perfectly legal." Harrow clicked open his satchel and pulled out a thick, impressive document, ribbons and seals already dangling from it. He spread it on the crate. "This is the new title survey, ceding the, shall we say, disputed Springhead to public domain, and your mortgage claim against it. We just need the final verification stamp." "Where's the seal?" the inspector asked, suspicious. "Right here," Harrow said. He produced a heavy, ornate brass stamp from his bag, the Territorial Land Office seal, certified this very afternoon. "Verity," Harrow called out. "Your ink. We need to stamp the map." The head surveyor turned. "Boy, you, there, the crate you brought. Fetch the fresh ink." This was the moment. Rowan's blood turned to ice, then to fire. She stepped out of the shadow, keeping her head down, her movements subservient. She picked up the wooden crate and walked into the circle of lantern light. The four men, Malloy, Harrow, the inspector, and Verity barely glanced at her. She was furniture. Her hands were shaking. She reached into the crate. Her fingers brushed the smooth, cool glass of both bottles. She grasped the oiled one. She pulled it out and placed it on the crate beside the heavy brass seal. She did not run. She simply stepped back, head bowed, and melted into the darkness once more. The inspector pulled a torch from a bracket on the depot wall, the pine resin hissing and flaring, to provide better light. He leaned in, holding the torch close to the paper to read the fine print. The heat from the flame washed over the crate. "Everything appears to be in order," the inspector muttered. "A simple formality." Harrow smiled. He picked up the heavy brass stamp, uncorked the bottle, and poured a pool of the dark, glistening ink onto a small tin pad. He pressed the seal into the ink, then lined it up on the bottom of the map and the deed. He pushed down with all his weight, then lifted the stamp with a flourish. At first, the seal was perfect, a dark, sharp-edged circle. "You see?" Harrow began. "Wait," the inspector said, leaning closer. Under the intense heat of the torch, the ink was changing. The oil Rowan had mixed in was separating from the pigment. The sharp, official edges of the seal began to blur. The ink bled, creeping outward into the fibers of the dried paper. In seconds, the proud territorial seal dissolved into an ugly, black, greasy smudge. The inspector straightened up, his face darkening. "What is this?" He touched the smudge. His finger came away black and slick with oil. This is a fraud," he roared. "This isn't ink. This is lamp oil." Harrow's face went white. He grabbed the bottle, sniffing it. "A mistake, a bad batch. It must be the heat, the humidity. It's a bad batch of lies. Harrow?" The voice came from the darkness. Coulter Ashford stepped out from behind the water tower, his rifle held steady, its barrel glinting in the torchlight. Eli was beside him, a shotgun leveled at the surveyors. "Ashford!" Malloy's voice was sharp, not with fear, but with pure, cold rage. "You're interfering with railroad business. That is a federal crime. And this," Coulter said, nodding to the smeared document, "is territorial fraud. It's over. Malloy." "Is it?" Malloy asked. From the other side of the depot, more boots sounded. Sheriff Amos Reddick appeared, flanked by 2 armed deputies. He looked pale and profoundly unhappy. "Mr. Malloy, Mr. Harrow," Reddick announced, his voice straining. I've received a sworn complaint from Mr. Cordell. There are serious allegations." Harrow looked like a trapped rat, his eyes darting from Coulter's rifle to Reddick's star. The inspector threw the papers on the ground in disgust. "This is an outrage. This contract is void. I am reporting this to Santa Fe." Burke Malloy held up one pale hand. Silence fell. He smiled. It was a reptilian movement of the lips, utterly devoid of humor. Gentlemen, please. Such drama over a simple clerical error." He did not look at Coulter. He looked at the inspector. "My lawyer, in his enthusiasm, brought the draft copy. An unfortunate mistake." Malloy reached inside his immaculate dark coat. He was not reaching for a gun. He produced a second, identical-looking document, already rolled and tied with a ribbon. "This," he said, handing it to the stunned inspector, "is the final copy. It was signed and sealed by the land commissioner in Santa Fe last week. His seal, as you will see, is quite dry." Coulter's blood ran cold. Rowan felt her stomach drop. He had a duplicate. He had planned for this. "We merely required your signature on the mortgage. Inspector," Malloy continued smoothly, "which is a separate document. This unpleasantness was just Ashford's last desperate attempt to stall progress." He turned his cold eyes on Coulter. "Sheriff, this man is armed, and he is trespassing. Arrest him for impeding federal commerce." Reddick's hand hovered over his pistol, his face a mask of indecision. Crack! A single gunshot exploded from the darkness, ripping through the night, not from Coulter, not from Eli. It came from the roof of the depot. "Ambush!" a voice screamed. It was Silas Dorn. Chaos erupted. The inspector shouted and ducked behind the crate. Harrow fell to his knees. Reddick's deputies, startled, drew their pistols and fired wildly at the unseen shadow on the roof. Dorn fired again, the bullet ricocheting off the train's engine. The train's bell began to clang, loud and frantic. With a deafening hiss of steam, the pistons engaged. The train was moving. "Into the car, it's not safe," Malloy yelled. He grabbed the inspector by the arm, shoving him and the scrambling Harrow toward the open door of the passenger car. "Ashford has brought gunmen." Coulter raised his rifle, sighting on Malloy, but Eli grabbed his arm. "Don't, boss. If you hit that inspector, they'll hang you for it. It's not worth it." Malloy shoved the two men into the car and stepped onto the rear platform, a dark silhouette. Silas Dorn dropped from the depot roof, landed on the moving freight car, and scrambled back to join his boss. As the train picked up speed, pulling out of the junction, Malloy stood motionless. He looked back at Coulter, his face impassive in the lantern light, a ghost of victory receding into the plains. The junction was suddenly terribly silent, filled only with the smell of gunpowder and the fading chuff of the engine. Sheriff Reddick, furious at being played and shot at, turned his rage on the only people left, the Verity Sun's surveyors, who were frantically trying to reload their chests. "Halt!" Reddick roared. "Nobody move by authority of the territory of New Mexico. I'm impounding this equipment, all of it pending a full investigation into this fraud." His deputies, glad to have someone to arrest, shoved the protesting surveyors against the depot wall. Coulter stood, his rifle lowered, staring down the empty track. He had lost. Rowan was by the abandoned crate. Her ink plot had failed. Malloy had been one step ahead. She felt a cold wave of despair. Then she saw it. In his haste, Clem Harrow had dropped his heavy leather satchel. While Reddick was shouting orders and Coulter was lost in his own dark thoughts, Rowan moved. She walked to the crate. She looked inside the satchel. It was full of papers, but the smeared, ruined deed was on top. Underneath it, however, was a separate, slim sheaf of papers, bound with a clip. It was not a contract. It was a list. Verity Sun's marker manifest red hollow line. It was a detailed inventory. It listed the coordinates for every old marker to be removed, and the exact coordinates for every new marker to be set. It was a perfect match to the calculations in Silas Dorn's notebook. It was the complete, detailed blueprint of the entire conspiracy. Her hands were steady now. She slipped the manifest from the satchel. She folded it, once, twice, and pushed it deep into the waistband of her canvas trousers, hidden beneath the baggy shirt. The ride back to the ranch was long and cold. Eli and the deputies herded the captured surveyors, who were now tied, on their own wagon. Coulter and Rowan rode side by side. Apart from the others, the night wind had a new edge, a sharp bite that promised winter. It cut through Rowan's thin shirt, and she began to shiver, the adrenaline gone, leaving only the cold. Coulter heard the faint chatter of her teeth. He pulled his horse to a stop. He unstrapped his heavy, wool-lined canvas ranch coat from behind his saddle. He urged his horse close to hers, their knees almost touching. He leaned over and draped the coat over her shoulders. It was impossibly heavy, and immediately warm. It enveloped her, smelling of him of wool, clean leather, sage, and the faint, lingering scent of the stable fire. She pulled the collar tight, clutching the lapels. "He got away," she whispered, her voice thick. "I failed. The ink, it didn't. He had another one." Coulter didn't look down the road. He looked at her. His face was shadowed by his hat, but his eyes were clear, reflecting the thin moonlight. "He was always going to have another one. Rowan, you forced him to show his hand. You proved the fraud in front of the sheriff and the railroad." He paused, his voice rough with an emotion she had never heard from him. You did what I owed this land, what I owed my father. You showed them the truth. But he took the truth with him. she said, looking up at his face. She saw the warmth in his eyes, the deep, unsteady gratitude. He was looking at her not as a secretary, not as a vagrant, but as an equal. Rowan reached into the front of her shirt, her cold fingers fumbling, and pulled out the folded papers. He didn't take all of it. Coulter stared at the manifest, a slow, hard, almost painful smile. The first true smile she had ever seen from him spread across his face. His eyes locked with hers, warm and shining in the dark. The smoke from the stable fire had barely cleared when Burke Malloy's counteroffensive struck Dry Willow. He returned to town not as a man who had fled, but as a businessman who had been attacked. By the time the sun was high, the Golden Spur was a hive of manufactured outrage. Malloy, immaculate as ever, bought a round of whiskey for everyone at the bar. His story, told by a visibly shaken Silas Dorn, was a masterpiece of deceit. "They ambushed us," Dorn proclaimed, his arm in a fresh sling, a dramatic false prop. "The railroad inspector, Mr. Malloy, just trying to secure the future of this town, Ashford, and that vagrant woman. They set a trap. They had gunmen, drove the train off. They're trying to stop the line, trying to keep Dry Willow poor." The narrative was poison, and it spread fast. The town, which had been wary of Malloy, was now terrified of losing the railroad. The promise of progress, even a corrupt one, was more potent than the truth. The town split like dry wood. Merchants who relied on freight contracts and expansion the livery. The feed store. The bank sided immediately with Malloy. "Ashford's gone rogue," they muttered. "He's sitting on that water, trying to choke the rest of us out." "And that woman," a man at the bar said. "The one he bought off the block. She's the one who sabotaged the seal. It's witchcraft, I say." The smaller homesteaders and ranchers, however, were silent. Their loyalty to Ashford, a fellow landowner, running deep. The debate spilled into Wainwright's mercantile, Mrs. Wainwright was bagging beans when the owner of the feed store, a man named Hatcher, confronted her. "I hear you're extending credit to Ashford," Hatcher accused, his face red. "You're siding with the man who's trying to ruin us all. That woman of his is a criminal." "Mrs." Wainwright finished tying the bag, her hand steady. She looked Hatcher in the eye. "That woman, Mr. Hatcher, is Rowan Hale, and she is a better citizen than the man you're buying whiskey for. That's slander." "Is it Mrs.?" Wainwright's voice was low, but it cut through the store. "You want to talk about progress. I'll tell you about Mr. Malloy's progress. My niece, Clara. She came here 2 years ago, rented a room at the Spur while she waited for a position as a teacher. She fell behind on her rent. 1 week, $7. The store went quiet. Mr. Malloy, Mrs. Wainwright continued, her voice trembling but gaining strength. He offered to clear her debt. He told her she didn't have to teach. She could entertain the men in the upstairs rooms. She refused. The next morning, Eli Cordell found her. She had drowned herself in the horse trough behind the livery. A collective, horrified gasp filled the room. "That, Mrs." Wainwright said, her voice like iron, "is Burke Malloy's progress. That is the debt he collects. Rowan Hale stood up to him. Coulter Ashford stood up to him. I stand with them." Before Hatcher could stammer a reply, the bell on the shop door jangled. Sheriff Amos Reddick entered, looking harassed. He was not there to shop. He held a folded, official document. "Mrs. Wainwright, Mr. Hatcher, there is an official notice." He unpinned the document and tacked it to the community board. It was a summons. Clem Harrow, on behalf of Burke Malloy, had filed a federal lawsuit against Coulter Ashford. The charge, willful and malicious interference with federal commerce and conspiracy to impede the expansion of the Southern Pacific Railroad. The ranch, and everyone on it, was now an enemy of the United States government. Back at Ashford Mesa, the news landed like a physical blow. Coulter held the summons, his face carved from stone. The manifest Rowan had secured was on the desk, the blueprint of the fraud, but this federal summons trumped it. They were trapped. Coulter looked at Rowan. She was standing by the window, watching the hands rebuild the burnt-out stable, their movements slow and heavy. The lawsuit, he knew, was not meant for him. It was meant for her. It was Malloy's way of marking her, of finishing the job he started at the auction. "Rowan," he said, his voice quiet. She turned. "This has gone too far," he said. He walked over to her, stopping a few feet away. "This isn't about water anymore. It's about me. And he's using you to see me bleed. The stable fire was a warning. This is the cage." He looked away, out the window. "I can have Eli take you to Santa Fe. Tonight, he can get you on a stage heading east. I'll give you enough money to start over. Somewhere no one knows your name." Rowan stared at him. She thought of the cold journey west. She thought of the alley in Dry Willow. She thought of the splintered wood of the auction block. "No." He turned back, his eyes searching hers. "Rowan, you don't understand. A federal marshal will be here inside a week. They'll take you as a witness, or an accomplice. You'll be in a cell. Malloy will see to it." "And what about you?" she asked, her voice steady. "I will handle Malloy." "By running," she challenged him. "By sending away the one person who can read his map, the one person who saw the ink fail." She stepped closer, her chin high. "Mr. Ashford, I was not safe when I was homeless. I was not safe when I was indebted. The only time I have truly been safe in this territory is standing on your land, fighting this man. If I run now, he owns this town, he owns that water, and he owns me. Just like he wanted to from the first. I am not for sale, and I am not running." The silence in the room was absolute. Coulter looked at her, seeing not the woman he had saved, but the woman who was now standing to save him. The storm in his gray eyes settled. "Then we are in this together," he said. The lawsuit had an immediate, practical effect. The bank in Dry Willow, acting on Malloy's influence, froze Coulter's credit. The feed store refused his orders. The town was starving them out. Eudora Pike, upon hearing the news, slammed a pot onto the stove. "They want a siege," she snorted. "They forget we have our own beef. We have a root cellar. We have 500 pounds of flour." Rowan looked at the ledgers. "We have enough for our 18 hands for a month, but the other small ranchers, the ones who graze near us, they'll be cut off too." "Then," Coulter said, walking into the kitchen, "we feed them all." They opened the dining hall. It was no longer just for the Ashford hands. It became a community kitchen, a fortress of solidarity. Eudora and Rowan cooked from dawn until dusk vats of thick beef stew, pans of cornbread, endless pots of coffee. The small homesteaders, the ones who had watched Malloy with fear, began to show up. They came for the food, but they stayed for the defiance. Mrs. Wainwright herself drove her wagon out, bringing a dozen split sacks of flour and sugar from her mercantile. "They're refusing my freight," she told Rowan, unloading the supplies. "So I'm disposing of damaged goods. You put it to good use." "Dear." Rowan was at the center of it all. She organized the supplies, managed the portions, her ledger now a tool of survival. Coulter, his rifle never far, carved the beef and served the plates. The act of sharing food became a quiet rebellion, forging a new community in the face of Malloy's greed. 2 days later, Rowan and Coulter were in the main grain barn, moving sacks of oats to the kitchen pantry. The air was heavy, humid, and an unnatural yellow. The sky had been threatening all day. As Coulter lifted a heavy sack, the first drop of rain hit the tin roof. It was a single, loud thwack. It was followed by another, then a cascade. Within seconds, the clouds burst. The first rain of the season fell in a sudden, violent deluge. The sound on the roof was a deafening roar. They stood in the barn's dry-smelling dimness, listening. The wind lashed the rain against the siding, and a fine, cool mist blew in through the open doors. "We'd better wait it out." Coulter shouted over the noise. Rowan nodded, moving deeper into the barn, away from the spray. The air smelled of dust, dry hay, and the sharp, clean scent of ozone. The downpour softened, settling into a steady, rhythmic drumming. The world outside was a gray sheet of water. Coulter leaned against a support beam. His arms crossed. He had been quiet all day, the weight of the lawsuit heavy on him. "My father," he said, his voice quiet, making Rowan start. He was looking out at the rain. He loved this sound. The first rain. He always said it was the sound of the land drinking, of promises being kept. He paused, his gaze distant. He died just before the rains came. 3 years ago. Cholera. It was fast. Took him in 2 days. The house, it just went silent. I've hated the silence ever since. Rowan watched him. It was the first time he had ever spoken of himself, of his past. The armor was cracked. She moved to stand near him. Not too close, just sharing the view of the rain. "My mother died when I was 10, she said, her own voice soft. I don't remember her voice, not really, but I remember her hands. They were never still, always kneading dough, or sewing, or digging in her garden. When she was gone, it felt like the whole house just stopped moving." He turned his head, looking at her. She was a woman defined by stillness. He was a man defined by silence. They were two halves of the same loss. The rain softened to a whisper. They were standing close, wrapped in the scent of hay and the damp earth. He reached out, his calloused fingers lightly touching her arm. "Rowan?" She looked up at him. His face was in shadow, but his eyes were clear, and they were asking. There was no demand in his gaze, no ownership. Only a deep, raw vulnerability that mirrored her own. She didn't pull away. She didn't speak. She leaned into his touch, a fractional movement that was her answer. He raised his other hand, his movement slow, as if afraid she might startle. He brushed a stray strand of hair from her cheek, his thumb grazing her skin. The simple touch was a jolt, a spark on dry tinder. He leaned in. The first brush of his lips against hers was soft, uncertain, a question. She let out a breath she had been holding, and her hand came up to rest on his shoulder, her fingers gripping his rough shirt. That was all the answer he needed. The kiss deepened. It was not the frantic, clumsy kiss of a boy. It was the deep, sure, devastating kiss of a man who had been holding back for a very long time. All the tension of the past weeks, the auction, the fear, the fire, the chase unwound in a single, prolonged moment. His arm slid around her waist, pulling her flush against him. He was solid, warm, a wall against the world. His other hand moved from her cheek to the back of her neck, his fingers tangling in her hair, holding her for the kiss. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, a frantic rhythm against the steady beat she could feel in his chest. The world outside the rain, the ranch, the lawsuit dissolved. There was only the warmth of his mouth, the solid grip of his arms, and the sound of their breathing. The kiss became more intense, hungrier. He shifted, pressing her back against a tall stack of hay bales, his body shielding hers from the cool air. The heat between them was immediate, overwhelming. He broke the kiss, but only to rest his forehead against hers. They were both breathing hard, their breath mingling in the cool air. He didn't let her go. "Rowan," he whispered, his voice rough. This is what I wanted to say. By the fire." "I know," she breathed, her eyes closed. He kissed her temple, a gentle, unsteady gesture. "This isn't right. Not now. Not while Malloy is trying to drag your name through a federal court. Not while this war is still on." She opened her eyes, looking up at him. She saw the respect in his gaze, the iron control, and it made her heart ache more than the kiss itself. "After," she whispered, her voice shaking but firm. "When this is over, when we've shown them the manifest and proven the truth." He nodded, his eyes locked on hers. "After, we'll tell the whole town." He kissed her once more, a brief, hard kiss that was a promise. Then he stepped back, though his hand remained on her arm, steadying them both. The rain-soaked barn and the desperate, hungry kiss had changed the air between them. The promise of after hung in the quiet ranch house, a live wire running beneath the floorboards. The federal lawsuit, Malloy's act of open war had forced them into a new kind of silence. It was no longer the silence of strangers. It was the heavy, charged quiet of two people who had said too much, and yet not nearly enough. That evening, the community kitchen was finally still. Eudora, exhausted, had retired to her room. The ranch hands were in their bunkhouse, the weight of the lawsuit pressing them into quiet card games and low whispers. Rowan was in the main parlor, a room rarely used. Sitting on a stiff horsehair sofa, a single kerosene lamp cast a pool of warm, golden light, leaving the corners of the room in deep shadow. She was staring at the wall, her mind replaying the kiss in the barn, the feel of his hands, the solidness of his chest. It terrified her. It was a vulnerability she could not afford. She heard his boots on the floorboards. Coulter entered the room. He didn't light another lamp. He just walked into the circle of light and stood there, looking at her. What happened in the barn?" he began, his voice rough, unpracticed in this new language. "I did not mean to." "You meant it," she said quietly, cutting him off. She wasn't an accuser. She was stating a fact. "Yes," he admitted. He sat on the bench opposite her, leaning forward, his forearms on his knees. He looked tired. "I meant it, but it was not proper. Not with everything you are facing. It was not fair to you." Rowan looked at his hands, those strong, capable hands that had steadied her in the corral, that had held her in the barn. "I am not a child, Coulter, and I am not a piece of delicate glass. Stop trying to protect me from what we both felt." His gaze lifted, meeting hers. The raw honesty of her words seemed to disarm him. He slowly moved from the bench to the sofa, sitting beside her. He did not sit close, leaving a respectable foot of space between them. But in the small circle of lamplight, it felt as intimate as a touch. "I don't know how to do this," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I know how to run cattle. I know how to fight. I do not know how to be." She gave a small, sad smile. "Neither do I." The silence returned, but it was different now. It was shared. He leaned back against the sofa, and after a long moment, she did, too. The tension of the day, the lawsuit, the fear seemed to drain out of her. He held out his hand, palm up, on the space between them. It was not a demand. It was an invitation. She looked at his hand, then at his face. His eyes were steady, watching her. Slowly, she placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, a warm, solid, anchoring weight. He tugged gently, and she shifted toward him. He released her hand only to put his arm around her shoulders, pulling her against his side. She let her head rest on his shoulder. It felt right. It felt solid. It felt like Eudora's barn door in a storm. They sat like that for a long time, just breathing. His hand rested on her shoulder, his thumb gently stroking the fabric of her sleeve. "When this is over," he whispered into her hair, his voice so low she almost did not hear it. I will not let you go." She tilted her head back, looking up at his strong jaw, the shadows playing on his face. He looked down, and his eyes, those gray, stormy eyes, were full of a question. It was the same question he had asked in the barn, but this time it was clearer, deeper. He was asking for permission, not just for a kiss, but for her. She did not speak. She simply nodded. A single, slow dip of her chin. It was all the answer he needed. He leaned down, and the kiss was nothing like the one in the barn. That had been fire and desperation. This was slow. It was deep, and it was sure. It was a kiss of profound tenderness, of discovery. His lips were soft, warm, moving over hers with a gentle, questioning pressure. Her free hand, the one that was not trapped between them, came up to rest on his chest. She could feel the steady, thumping beat of his heart under her palm, a rhythm that seemed to calm the frantic pace of her own. He pulled her closer, his arm tightening around her back, his other hand coming up to cup her jaw, his thumb tracing the line of her cheek. He held her as if she were precious, as if he were memorizing her. The kiss deepened, and she opened to him, a soft sigh escaping her. It was a kiss that spoke of lonely nights, of silent burdens, of a connection found in the most desperate of circumstances. It began to build, the heat she remembered from the barn returning, coiling low in her belly. His hand slid from her jaw down her throat, his fingers spreading warm against her collarbone. She gripped his shirt, her fingers tightening in the rough cotton. He broke the kiss. He pulled back, just enough to rest his forehead against hers. They were both breathing fast, their breath mingling. The lamplight caught the shine in his eyes. He looked at her, his gaze intense, and a slow, unsteady smile touched his lips. She, in turn, found herself smiling back, a shaky, breathless smile. He had stopped. He had respected the line. He had not taken. He had asked, and he had received, and he had not demanded more. "After," he whispered, his voice thick. "After." She agreed, her voice barely audible. The moment of shared intimacy, of a promise made and respected, settled them. It was as if the final, necessary piece of their alliance had clicked into place. Rowan sat up, pulling her hand from his, though his arm remained lightly on her shoulders. She felt anchored. She looked at the desk across the room, where the Verity manifest and Dorn's notebook lay. "That promise," she said, her voice stronger. "It starts now, the legal fight." He nodded, the tenderness in his eyes replaced by the familiar, sharp focus. "We have the manifest." They moved to the office desk. The shift from intimacy to strategy seamless. They were partners now, in every sense of the word. Rowan spread the papers under the lamp. Dorn's notebook, the Verity manifest, and her own hand-drawn copy of the old survey map. "I saw it at the junction, but I wasn't sure," she said, her finger tracing the columns. "I am now. Look." She pointed to the first entry in Dorn's book. Bishop's Rock, his coordinates. Then she pointed to the manifest. Verity's coordinates for the new marker. They match perfectly. "It proves they were working together," Coulter said. "It proves more than that," Rowan said, her voice gaining the sharp, precise edge of her bookkeeper's mind. She grabbed a pencil and a blank piece of paper. "Your father's original survey. The line is here." She drew it. "The fraudulent line is here." She drew a second line. "It's not just a random error. I did the calculations. From Bishop's Rock, all the way down the 2-mile spring line. Every single one of Malloy's new markers. They are shifted exactly 2 degrees east-northeast." Coulter leaned in, watching her pencil move. 2 degrees. Every single one, she affirmed. "A surveyor might make one mistake. He might misread the sun, but he does not make the exact same 2-degree error 12 times in a row. This isn't a mistake. This is a system. This is a deliberate, calculated, fraudulent formula. We can prove the intent." Coulter stared at the map. A fingerprint. Their entire plan. Printed in their own ink. This is what we take to the territorial judge in Hawkes Ferry. "Reddick will never let us get there," Coulter said, "and Harrow will file a motion. We'll be tied up in court until the snow flies." "Then we don't just bring the evidence," Rowan said, standing up, her energy filling the small room. "We bring a case so strong a corrupt sheriff can't stop it and a crooked lawyer can't dismiss it. We need 3 things." She began to pace. "First, we need this." She tapped her drawing. A clear, simple presentation of the fraud, something a judge can understand in 5 minutes. Not just the numbers, but a picture. Eudora, who had entered silently, carrying a tray with a fresh pot of coffee, spoke from the doorway. "Pencil drawings won't do. Child, it needs to look official. Like something from a bank." She set the tray down. "Mrs. Wainwright's son, the one who passed. He left a typewriter at the Mercantile. She keeps it in the back. I'll write in at dawn. You draw the diagrams. Rowan, you write the words. I will make them look like thunder." Rowan looked at the older woman, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you, Eudora." "Second," Coulter said, catching her drift. "We need to prove this isn't just about my land. Malloy is painting me as a greedy rancher, holding back progress." "Exactly," Rowan said. "We need to show this is about the valley." Eli, who had been standing in the hall, stepped in. "The ranchers and homesteaders, the ones we're feeding, they're scared of Malloy, but they're more scared of a dry winter. They know that spring feeds the whole water table." "Can you get them to sign?" Coulter asked his foreman. "I can," Eli said. His jaws set. "I'll ride out at first light. I'll get every man and woman who ever drew water from a well on this mesa to sign a public interest declaration. We'll show the judge this isn't about one ranch, it's about all of us." "Good," Coulter said. He looked back at the desk. "That's the paper, that's the people. What's the third thing?" "A voice," Rowan said. "We have the numbers, but we need a human being. We need someone from their side who knows the truth, someone who can testify about Verity and Sons, and why they would agree to this." Coulter was silent for a long moment, staring at the name on the manifest. "Jabez Quinn." Eli and Eudora both looked at him. "Old Jabez," Eli said. Skeptical. "He's a drunk, boss, lives in a shack up by the silver mine. He's also the best railroad engineer who ever worked this territory," Coulter said. "He was the lead surveyor for the Southern Pacific before Verity and Sons got the contract. He was fired. They said it was for drinking. But I was there. I heard the argument. It wasn't about the bottle, it was about the line. Quinn refused to sign off on the new survey maps. He said they were crooked as a snake's path. Verity and Sons took his job the next day." "He's our witness," Rowan breathed. "If he's sober." Eli muttered. "And if he's not too scared to talk?" Eudora added, "I'll go." Coulter said, "Eudora, you and Rowan handle the brief. Eli, you get the signatures. I'll ride to the mine at dawn. I will find Jabez Quinn, and I will bring him back." The War Council was set. Just before the first gray light of dawn, Coulter was in the new, makeshift corral, saddling his horse. The air was sharp and cold, the stars brilliant in the last moments of night. Rowan came out, wrapped in his heavy ranch coat. She carried a small, cloth-wrapped bundle. "Eudora made biscuits," she said, handing it to him. He took it, securing it in his saddlebag. He turned to her, and they stood in the cold silence, the steam of their breath clouding in the air. He reached out and took her hand, not the one he had kissed, but the one he had bandaged. The scrape was nearly healed. His grip was warm and sure. "This is the truth we're fighting for. Rowan," he said, his voice quiet, "for her alone. But it's not the only one." He looked at her, his gaze steady in the dim light. "For 3 years, I've been choosing to hold on, to survive. This is the first time I've chosen to move forward." He squeezed her hand. "I choose the truth, and I choose you." Rowan felt the words settle deep inside her, a new, solid foundation. She squeezed his hand back. "Be safe, Coulter." He held her gaze for one more long moment, then released her hand, swung himself up into the saddle, and rode out into the gathering dawn. The county courthouse in Hawks Ferry was packed. It was a larger, more imposing room than any in Dry Willow, built of dark wood that still smelled of fresh varnish, but the heat was just as oppressive. Men stood 3 deep along the back wall, fanning themselves with their hats. At the front, Burke Malloy sat beside his lawyer, Clem Harrow, looking serene, as if he were merely observing a dull theatrical. Coulter, Rowan, and Eli sat on the opposite bench. Beside them sat Jabez Quinn, a man who looked like a bundle of dry sticks, his hands shaking so badly he kept them tucked under his arms. He smelled faintly of the cheap whiskey Coulter had used to coax him out of his shack. "Judge Harrison," Clem Harrow began, his voice slick and confident. He rose, spreading his hands. "We are here today because of a federal summons. Mr. Ashford, in a fit of pique, has interfered with a legal, binding contract between Mr. Malloy's Development Corporation and the Southern Pacific Railroad. A contract I add, that was sealed and verified in Santa Fe. He pushed a thick, ribbon-bound document across the table. This is the signed mortgage for the water rights. It is a done deal. We are here simply to ask the court to enforce the federal injunction, to remove Mr. Ashford from the property, and to allow progress to move forward. Harrow gave Coulter a thin, victorious smirk. Judge Harrison, a heavy man with a tired, intelligent face, looked at the document. He then looked at Coulter. Mr. Ashford, this looks quite official. What defense do you offer? Your Honor, Coulter said, rising. He did not look at Harrow. He looked at the judge. The contract is based on a lie, a survey map that is a deliberate fraud. We have proof. Proof, Harrow laughed, a short, barking sound. What proof? The word of a failed rancher and a... He let his gaze slide over Rowan, his meaning clear. The testimony of a bookkeeper, Mr. Harrow, Rowan said, standing up. Her voice was clear, steady, and cut through the murmuring in the courtroom. The judge raised an eyebrow. Mrs. Hale, please proceed. Rowan and Eli carried forward a large easel, on which several large sheets of paper were tacked. They were her diagrams, the ones Eudora had typed the labels for, the lines drawn with a draftsman's precision. Your Honor, Rowan began, addressing the judge. This is not about opinions. It is about mathematics. This is a copy of the original 1865 survey of the Ashford Mesa. She pointed to the first drawing. As you can see, the red hollow springhead is located well within the property line, marked by the geological formation known as Bishop's Rock. She flipped the page. This is a copy of the map drawn by Mr. Malloy's surveyors. Verity and Sons, the one his entire contract is based on. To the naked eye, they appear identical, but they are not. She flipped to a third page, a close-up comparison. Using the surveyor's own field log, which we recovered, we found a discrepancy. The coordinates for Bishop's Rock have been moved, not by a random error. They have been moved exactly 2 degrees east-northeast. A murmur went through the crowd. 2 degrees meant nothing to most of them, but the precision of it sounded damning. This 2-degree error, Rowan continued, her voice gaining strength, is repeated at every single marker along the 2-mile boundary. It is a systematic, deliberate formula, a formula designed for one purpose: to shift the boundary line just far enough east to place the red hollow spring in public domain. It is not a survey. Your Honor, it is a theft, calculated to the inch. Harrow was on his feet. Objection, this is fantasy. This woman is not a surveyor. She has no qualifications. But I do. A shaky voice croaked from the witness bench. All eyes turned to Jabez Quinn. He was pale, but his eyes were blazing with a cold, sober fire. Mr. Quinn, Coulter said, please tell the court who you are. I am Jabez Quinn. I was the chief engineer for the Southern Pacific Railroad, New Mexico Territory, for 10 years. Harrow's smirk vanished. Mr. Quinn, Coulter continued, have you seen the Verity and Sons survey before? Jabez nodded, his hands gripping the rail. I have. They brought it to me, to sign off on, before they got the contract. And did you sign it? No, Quinn said. I did not. Why not? Because it was crooked, Quinn said, his voice rising. It was sweetening the line. They called it shaving degrees to make the land fit the contract. Malloy wanted the water, the railroad wanted the water, and Verity was paid to move the spring. On paper, I told them it was fraud. I told them I wouldn't ruin my name on a 2-degree lie. So they fired me. They said I was drunk, and they gave the contract to Verity. The courtroom was utterly silent. The judge stared at Jabez, then at Malloy. Burke Malloy had not moved. He looked calm, bored. Even Judge Harrison leaned back, steepling his fingers. He looked at the federal contract. He looked at Rowan's maps. He looked at Jabez Quinn. In light of this testimony, the judge began, his voice grave. Boom! A low, heavy explosion rocked the courthouse, rattling the windows in their frames, A plume of black smoke, thick and oily, rose into the sky in the distance. In the direction of Dry Willow, the courtroom doors burst open. A man staggered in, his face pale with panic. "Fire, Your Honor, the town! They've blown the grain silo! Wainwright's granary is on fire!" Chaos erupted. Men shouted, standing on the benches. Burke Malloy stood up. His voice was not a shout, but it carried, cold and sharp with outrage. "Your Honor, this is his answer, Ashford. He brought his ranch hands, his hired thugs. They are rioting, burning the town because the law was turning against them. This is insurrection." Harrow was already at the judge's bench. "Your Honor, we demand you declare a mistrial. We demand the immediate arrest of Coulter Ashford for inciting this violence." Judge Harrison was trapped. The evidence of fraud was on his desk, but the evidence of arson was in the sky. Sheriff Reddick, who had been standing near the back, looked utterly lost. Coulter grabbed Eli by the arm. "It's a diversion. Malloy's move. He's burning our proof." He looked at Mrs. Wainwright, who had just arrived for the hearing, her face white with horror. "Eli, with me," Coulter ordered. He turned to Rowan. His eyes were flint. "Stay with the judge. Don't let them dismiss this. Hold the line." He and Eli were gone, sprinting from the courthouse, their boots pounding on the boardwalk. Rowan watched them go, her heart a cold knot of fear. Dry Willow was a scene from hell. Wainwright's granary was a roaring torch, a tower of flame that licked at the sky. The heat was so intense it peeled the paint from the buildings across the street. Embers, large as a man's fist, rained down, carried by the wind. The town's volunteer fire brigade was useless, their hand pump overwhelmed. Rowan, Eudora, and Mrs. Wainwright arrived in their wagon, to a scene of panicked, disorganized shouting. The men were running, but without direction. "They're letting it spread," Eudora cried, pointing. An ember had caught the canvas awning of the mercantile. "Bucket brigade," Rowan shouted, her voice raw, pulling Eudora with her. "To the main trough now!" She grabbed a bucket, plunged it into the trough, and ran toward the mercantile, her skirt soaking. She threw the water on the awning. Her action, clear and direct, cut through the panic. Mrs. Wainwright, her face a grim mask of resolve, began shouting at the men. "A line, form a line! You fools, save the store!" Women who had, only days before, whispered about Rowan, now found themselves standing shoulder to shoulder with her, passing heavy, sloshing buckets of water. Eudora was at the trough, a general organizing the troops, her voice a bark. They were saving the mercantile, but the granary was lost, a roaring monument to Malloy's ruthlessness. Coulter and Eli thundered into town, their horses panicked by the heat. Coulter saw the bucket brigade, saw Rowan, her face black with soot, her hair coming undone. He saw the granary was gone. This was the diversion. Coulter yelled to Eli over the roar. "He drew us all here. What's the real target?" He scanned the street. The fire was hot, but it was contained to the one building. This was not enough. Malloy was more thorough. Then he saw it, a shadow, moving fast, slipping into the dark alley behind the mercantile, carrying 2 heavy cans. "Eli, hold the line here." Coulter dismounted. Leaving his horse, he ran, pulling his coat over his face to shield him from the flying cinders. He rounded the corner of the mercantile, into the alley. Silas Dorn was there. He had already splashed the contents of 1 can of kerosene against the dry wooden back wall of the store. He was opening the second. "Dorn!" Coulter roared. Dorn spun, his face demonic in the red glow of the fire. He didn't hesitate. He threw the open can, splashing kerosene toward Coulter. Coulter dove, the flammable liquid splashing where he had been. Dorn charged, pulling a knife. But Coulter was faster. He came up from his roll, meeting Dorn's charge with his shoulder, slamming the smaller man into the brick wall of the next building. They fell, grappling in the ash-strewn alley. Dorn was wiry, fighting with a desperate, animal strength. He slashed with the knife. Coulter caught his wrist, the blade stopping an inch from his face. Embers rained down around them, hissing on the damp ground. Coulter used his weight, driving his fist into Dorn's ribs. Dorn grunted. The wind knocked out of him, but he twisted. Kicking Coulter in the knee, Dorn broke free, scrambling to his feet. He pulled a small pistol from his boot. Coulter lunged, but he was too late. Dorn fired. The sound was small, almost lost in the roar of the main fire. Coulter felt a white-hot searing pain across his left shoulder, as if he had been branded. The bullet had torn through the muscle, a deep, burning graze. Dorn smiled, raising the pistol for a second. More careful shot. The pain vanished, replaced by a cold, pure rage. Coulter ignored the gun, closed the distance in one stride, and hit Silas Dorn with a right hand that carried all the weight of his land, his father, and his fury. The blow snapped Dorn's head back, his pistol firing harmlessly into the air. He collapsed, boneless, a sack of rags against the wall. Coulter stood over him, breathing heavily, his shoulders screaming, blood seeping hot down his arm. He hauled Dorn up by his shirt. The fire was Malloy's order, Coulter stated, his voice a deadly growl. Dorn, his lips split and bleeding, was terrified. He said to burn it all, burn the proof, burn the whole town. He'll let you hang for this. Silas, arson, attempted murder. You'll swing before he even posts your bail. I don't care, Dorn cried, his bravado gone. He'll kill me if I talk. He's got the book, he's got all our names. Coulter's grip tightened. What book? The ledger, Dorn gasped, tears of panic and pain streaming through the soot on his face. His private one, where he keeps the payoffs. He pays Harrow. He paid the old land commissioner. He paid Reddick. He pays everyone. It's all in the book. Where? Coulter demanded. Where is it? In the spur, Dorn shrieked. In the attic under a loose floorboard by the west window. His whole world is in that box. That night, the town was a graveyard of smoking ruins. The granary was gone. The mercantile was saved. Coulter, his shoulder tightly bandaged by Eudora, his arm in a sling, walked into the sheriff's office. Rowan was with him. Sheriff Reddick was at his desk, his head in his hands. He's failed, Amos, Coulter said quietly. Reddick looked up, his eyes dead. What? Malloy? He failed. The town turned against the fire, and Silas Dorn is in my cellar. He confessed. He told me about the ledger. Reddick's face went white. The one you're in, Coulter added. Reddick stared at Coulter. He saw the sling. He saw the cold promise in the rancher's eyes. He saw the end of his career. His only chance was to be the man who found the book, not the man found in it. You have a warrant? Reddick asked, his voice hollow. I have a sworn confession. Coulter said, That's all you need. You're coming with us. They moved through the dark, silent town. Reddick, 2 deputies he trusted, Coulter and Rowan. The Golden Spur was dark, its doors locked. Reddick kicked one open. They moved upstairs, their lanterns casting huge, dancing shadows. The attic smelled of dust, stale beer, and rats. West window, Coulter said. Rowan, holding a lamp, moved first. She saw it instantly. A single board, its edges cleaner than the others. Here, one of the deputies handed Coulter a pry bar. With his good arm, he jammed it into the crack and heaved. The board groaned and came up. Beneath it was a locked, tin strongbox. Reddick looked at it as if it were a snake. He pulled his pistol and shot the lock. The sound was deafening in the small space. Coulter lifted the lid. It was a ledger, just like Dorn said. Rowan took it. Her hands were steady. She opened it to the last page and ran her finger down the entries. Her face was grim. Verity and Sons, $500. Consultation fee. Clem Harrow. Retainer. $1,000. Judge Martin the old one. Loan. $2,000. Her fingers stopped. Amos Reddick. Donation to Town Safety Fund. $100. Paid monthly. Reddick closed his eyes. They took the ledger to Judge Harrison, waking him from his sleep. He stood in his nightshirt, his face grim as he looked at the book under the lamplight, at Coulter's sling, at Rowan's soot-stained face. He closed the ledger. This court is in receipt of new evidence which suggests a criminal conspiracy of astounding breadth. He looked at Reddick. Sheriff, you are relieved of your duties. Place yourself under the arrest of your deputies. He turned to Coulter. Mr. Ashford, I am issuing an immediate, temporary injunction. All water transactions, contracts, and claims related to the Red Hollow Spring are hereby frozen. He sighed, running a hand over his face. This is beyond a simple hearing. I am convening a special grand jury, effective at sunrise. They will hear all of it. The maps, the testimony, this ledger, and the confession of Silas Dorn. Go home, Mr. Ashford. Get some rest. Your final battle is tomorrow. The sunrise over Hawks Ferry did not promise warmth. It promised judgment. The special grand jury, comprised of 12 ranchers and merchants from across the county, sat in the jury box. The courtroom was packed, the air thick and silent. Burke Malloy and Clem Harrow were at their table, Harrow looking pale and disheveled, Malloy still and composed, as if this were a minor inconvenience. Coulter sat in the front row, his arm in a clean white sling, his face set. Eli was beside him. Judge Harrison entered, and the room stood. This court is convened to hear evidence in a special grand jury proceeding regarding charges of conspiracy, fraud, and arson. The judge announced. The testimony given yesterday was compelling. We will resume. I call Mrs. Rowan Hale to the stand. Rowan walked to the witness box. Her dress was simple, her hair pulled back. She looked clean, composed, and unshakable. She did not look at Coulter. She did not look at the jury. She looked directly at Burke Malloy. Mrs. Hale, the judge said gently. Please tell the court your story. From the beginning. Rowan took a breath. My name is Rowan Hale. I arrived in Dry Willow approximately 7 weeks ago. I was without funds. I was arrested for vagrancy and for a debt of $20, owed to Mr. Malloy for a room I could not pay for. She turned her gaze to the jury. I was put on an auction block in the town square, to be sold. For 6 months, I was starving, and I was terrified. I collapsed. The courtroom was so quiet. The buzz of a fly near the window was a roar. That, she said, her voice clear and strong, was where Mr. Coulter Ashford first saw me. He did not bid. He paid my fine. He caught me. She looked back at Malloy. Mr. Malloy was there. He was angry. He wanted me. Not for the debt. He wanted me because he knew I was a vulnerability to Mr. Ashford. He wanted to own the woman Mr. Ashford had saved. Harrow jumped to his feet. Objection, this is fantasy. It is slanderous presumption. Sit down, Mr. Harrow, the judge said, his voice like iron. This is a grand jury proceeding. The witness will tell her story. Continue, Mrs. Hale. Rowan did. She detailed the rumors Malloy's men had spread about her. She detailed the sabotage of the water flume. She detailed the fire that destroyed the stable, and the arsonist who confessed he was paid to create a diversion for the meeting at the junction. This was never about a $20 debt, Rowan said, her voice ringing with a conviction that was absolute. It was about a pattern. It was about creating debts that did not exist. It was about manufacturing leverage. Mr. Malloy did not just try to defraud Mr. Ashford of his water. He tried to defraud me of my liberty. His methods are the same. Whether he is dealing with a springhead or a human being, he finds what you value, and he tries to take it. She finished. There was no applause, only a profound, heavy silence. Thank you, Mrs. Hale. The judge said, The evidence was presented again, this time for the jury. Jabez Quinn, sober and dressed in a borrowed suit, delivered his testimony about the 2-degree lie with the fury of a shamed professional. Rowan's diagrams were presented, showing the clear, systematic nature of the fraud. The Verity Manifest and Dorn's notebook were laid side by side, a perfect match. And then, the judge produced the black ledger. This ledger, the judge said, was recovered from a hidden compartment in the attic of the Golden Spur Saloon. following a sworn confession regarding the arson of the Wainwright granary. Clem Harrow knew the game was over. While the judge began to read the entries, the payoffs to the old land commissioner, the consultation fees to Verity and Sons Harrow began to gather his papers. He was sliding, crab-like, toward the side exit. He thought no one was watching. He reached the door and pulled it open, only to find his path blocked by the heavy, disgraced figure of Amos Reddick. The former sheriff, his star gone, stood in the doorway, his arms crossed. "Sit down, counselor," Reddick grunted, his voice full of gravel. "I do believe they are about to read your name." Harrow froze, his face a mask of sweat and terror. "The court calls Silas Dorn," the judge said. Dorn was brought in, his wrists in cuffs. He looked small and broken. He had been offered leniency in exchange for his full testimony. He looked at Malloy, then quickly looked away. "Mr. Dorn," the judge said, "did you set the fire at the Ashford stable?" "Yes, sir," Dorn whispered. "And the Wainwright granary?" "Yes, sir." "On whose orders?" Dorn took a shaking breath. "His Mr. Malloy's." "Did you sabotage the Ashford water flume?" "Yes." "Did you attempt to place fraudulent survey markers at the Red Hollow Spring?" "Yes, it was all Mr. Malloy's plan. The whole thing. The maps, the fire, the railroad meeting." Dorn looked at the judge. Desperate. "But that ledger, that's just the bribes. That ain't the real money. He keeps the cash, the big money, the payoff from the railroad. He was bragging about it. It's in a tin box, under the floorboards of his office at the Spur. He showed it to me. He said that was the money that made him invisible." Burke Malloy, for the first time, closed his eyes. It was the smallest, most complete admission of defeat. He had not just lost his plan, he had lost his money. Judge Harrison looked at the jury. They merely nodded, their faces hard. The judge stood. The room held its breath. "This court," he said, his voice echoing, "finds that an undeniable and vast criminal conspiracy has been perpetrated against Mr. Coulter Ashford and against the people of this territory. It is the judgment of this court that the water contract, deed, and mortgage, being based on systematic and malicious fraud, are hereby declared null and void." A wave of exhaled breath swept the room. "It is further ordered that the Red Hollow Spring, based on the historical needs of this valley and the public interest declarations signed by the citizens, shall be placed in a community trust, its use governed by local custom and shared equally." A low cheer started at the back of the room. "And finally," the judge said, his voice like ice, "I hereby issue warrants for the immediate arrest of Mr. Burke Malloy and Mr. Clem Harrow on charges of conspiracy, mail fraud, bribery, and arson. A warrant is also issued for the principals of the Verity and Sons Surveying Company. Mr. Dorn, your testimony will be taken into consideration, but you are remanded into custody." Harrow crumpled. Malloy stood up, slowly, buttoning his coat. He looked at Rowan, his eyes as cold and dead as a winter snake. Then he turned and held out his wrists for the deputies. The room erupted. Men were shouting, clapping Coulter on his good shoulder, shaking Eli's hand. The trial was over. Justice had been done. Rowan felt a wave of dizziness, the adrenaline of 7 weeks vanishing all at once. She gripped the rail, her knuckles white. A hand touched her arm. It was Mrs. Wainwright. The older woman's face was wet with tears. She pulled Rowan into a fierce, strong hug. "Oh, child," she whispered, her voice thick. "You did it. You stood up. He tried to own us all with that water. He tried to make us all thirsty." She pulled back, holding Rowan's shoulders. "You saved us. You saved this town." Rowan, overwhelmed, could only nod. She looked for Coulter. He was by the door, watching her. He nodded once, then turned and walked out into the sunlight. She followed him. She stepped out of the dark, hot courthouse onto the high, wide steps. The air was clear, the sky a piercing blue. Below them, the townspeople were watching, a new cheer rising as Malloy, in irons, was loaded into a prison wagon. Coulter was standing by a pillar, his arm in its sling, his face turned toward the light. He looked peaceful. She walked to him, stopping a few feet away. The noise of the crowd below seemed to fade, becoming a distant rush, like a river. He turned to her. "Rowan," he said, his voice quiet, "for her alone. That first day, in the square, I paid $20 for your fine." "I know," she said softly. "The debt." "No," he said. He shook his head. A small, definite movement. "There is no debt, not between us. I don't think there ever was." He looked at her, and the gray storm of his eyes was gone, replaced by a deep, clear warmth. "I told you by the fire, there were things I had left unsaid, that I wanted to build." He reached out his good hand, not to touch her, but holding it open between them. "This ranch," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "It was just a place I was holding on to, a place my father built, but it was silent. It was just rock and dust. Until you came." He looked at his hand, then back at her. "I am not just holding on anymore. Rowan, I want to build, but I will not do it alone." Raoul's eyes filled with tears, but she did not let them fall. She stepped forward, closing the distance. She did not take his hand. She laid her own hand on his chest, over his heart. "Coulter," she whispered, her voice shaking but sure. "We chose each other the moment you caught me. When I fell. Today is just the first time we've been allowed to say it out loud." A slow, hard-won smile, the one she had seen only once before, spread across his face. It was the smile of a man coming home. He put his good arm around her, his hand settling firmly on her back, and pulled her to him. He was solid and warm and real. He leaned down, and there, on the steps of the courthouse, in front of the entire town, Coulter Ashford kissed her. It was not the desperate, hungry kiss of the barn. It was not the tender, questioning kiss of the parlor. This was a kiss of fact, a kiss of promise. It was deep, and it was sure, and it was public. It was a declaration. Rowan wrapped her arms around him, her hand moving up to his uninjured shoulder, holding him as tightly as he was holding her. She was not falling. She was anchored. Below them, the crowd, seeing the embrace, turned from the spectacle of Malloy's defeat. A new cheer went up, this one louder, clearer, and full of a joy that had nothing to do with justice and everything to do with hope. Coulter held her, his forehead resting against hers. Two survivors standing in the bright, high noon sun. The fall came to the Ashford Mesa not as a quiet surrender, but as a deep, satisfied breath. The land, having drunk deep from the summer rains and the victory at the courthouse, turned a rich, deep gold. On the high plain, the sound of industry returned, but it was a new sound. It was the scrape of shovels and the ring of hammers on anvils, not for defense, but for construction. Coulter, his shoulder healing strong, led the work. They were building a community reservoir, a wide, stone-lined basin to capture the overflow from Red Hollow, and a main canal that would feed the smaller homesteads down valley. The Ashford Mesa Ranch was no longer an island. It was an anchor. Rowan, too, had a new role. She still kept the ranch's ledgers, but her primary work was the new community water ledger. It was kept on the desk in the main parlor, open for any citizen to inspect. It tracked the hours of water usage, the rotations, the needs of the farms versus the ranches. It was a document of profound trust, the absolute opposite of the black, hidden ledger Malloy had kept in his attic. She was no longer a bookkeeper. She was the valley's guarantor. The healing flowed back into Dry Willow. Eudora Pike, seeing the need, refused to let the community kitchen fade. Every Saturday, she loaded a wagon with Ashford beef and bread and set up in the rebuilt, albeit smaller, Wainwright Granary. The Saturday kitchen became the new heart of the town, a place where ranchers and merchants met not as factions, but as neighbors. Their arguments muffled by good stew. Eli Cordell, his steady quietness a balm on the town's frayed nerves, took the young sons and daughters of the homesteaders under his wing. He started a riding class, teaching the children how to care for a mount, how to read the land. He was seeding the future, ensuring the next generation understood the value of the land they had all fought to protect. The railroad, as it turned out, still came, the Southern Pacific, its reputation stained by the Verity scandal, sent a new team of engineers. They apologized to the territory and publicly routed their line 20 miles south, through a different pass, striking a fair and open deal with the ranchers there. Dry Willow would still get its connection, but it would be on its own terms. The town had survived without selling its soul. The old guard fell away. Amos Reddick, disgraced by his name in Malloy's ledger, quietly turned in his star and left the territory. The town, in its newfound wisdom, did not elect another politician or a businessman. They elected Henry Oakes, a quiet farmer from the Low Valley, a man whose hands were calloused by soil, not by counting coin. Dry Willow had chosen a protector, not an opportunist. The old poison was purged. Burke Malloy, his assets seized, was transported in irons to the federal prison in Santa Fe. The firm of Verity & Sons was barred from practicing in the territory, their name a synonym for fraud. One crisp afternoon in late October, Coulter and Rowan rode up to the Red Hollow Springhead. The air was cold, smelling of pine and wet stone. The false lime marker that Silas Dorn had poured was still there, a pale, ugly scar on the land. Coulter took a sledgehammer from his saddle. With one blow, he shattered the lie, breaking the marker into a dozen pieces. Rowan knelt and cleared the rubble. Together, they lifted a new stone, a heavy, dark slab of granite they had pulled from the Ashford quarry. They set it deep into the earth, at the exact coordinates of the original survey. Rowan had spent a week carving into it, her letters deep and sure. When they were finished, they stood back and read the inscription, "This water feeds the righteous." That night, the ranch was still. A profound, earned peace had settled over the stone house. The wind outside was cold, but the parlor was warm, a single lamp burning. The ledgers finally closed. Coulter stood by the window, watching the stars, which seemed close enough to touch in the clear, high desert air. Rowan came to him, a heavy wool shawl wrapped around her shoulders. She stood beside him, and for a long time, they just watched the sky. He turned to her, and the gravity of all they had endured was in his eyes. He reached out and touched her face, his thumb tracing the line of her cheek, a gesture that was now familiar, a gesture that meant home. "You're cold," he whispered. He pulled her into his embrace, wrapping his own heavy ranch coat around her, enveloping her in his warmth, his scent. She leaned her head against his chest, her arms sliding around his waist. Holding him tight, they stood as one, listening to the wind, his heart beating a slow, steady rhythm under her ear. "Rowan," he murmured into her hair. She tilted her head back. He looked at her, his eyes asking the question he no longer needed to voice. She answered by rising on her toes, her hand moving to the back of his neck and pulling his mouth down to hers. The kiss was slow. It was deep. It was a promise fulfilled. It held all the memory of the past weeks, the fear, the fire, the rain-soaked barn, but the desperation was gone, replaced by a certainty that was as solid as the stone walls around them. His hands moved over her back, not in haste, but in possession, a statement of fact, holding her as if she were the only real thing in the world. He broke the kiss, but only for a moment, and a sudden, bright joy lit his face. It was a release, a sudden unwinding of the tension he had carried for 3 years. In one fluid motion, he bent, his good arm sliding under her knees, his other arm secure around her back, and he lifted her. She gasped, her hands flying to his shoulders, laughing a breathless, surprised laugh. He spun her around once, a slow, celebratory turn in the golden lamplight. He set her down gently, but he did not let her go. He held her, their foreheads touching, his eyes locked on hers. He was breathing hard, but he was smiling, that rare, true smile that transformed his face. "I will spend my life," he whispered, his voice thick, "making you feel safe." Rowan closed her eyes, her own promise caught in her throat. He held her, his arms a fortress, and the frame closed on their embrace, a silent, unshakable vow against the vast, dark plains. The final scene was not in the night. It was at dawn. They stood at the Red Hollow Spring, at the new marker. The first light of morning broke over the mesa, spilling gold and rose across the landscape, striking the surface of the spring water until it glittered like 1,000 shattered diamonds. Rowan leaned against Coulter's side, his arm wrapped tightly around her. She was watching the light on the water. "The day I fell," she said, her voice quiet, almost to herself. "You caught my hand. I have not fallen again since that moment." Coulter turned his head, kissing the top of hers. He looked out at the water, his valley, his future. "From that moment," he replied, his voice a low, sure rumble. "I knew the one thing in this world I would never let anyone put up for sale. You." "She's not for sale. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We would love to know where in the world you are listening from. So please drop a comment below and share your thoughts. Be sure to subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 like this video, and give us your support by hitting that hype button to help this story be heard by more people.